Hello, Jeando.
Good morning, Kevin.
So one of the things you've been talking about is the use of the mechanisms of the organism. And there is more than one mechanism. So something we have to learn how to do is to the mental and physical coordination of more than one mechanism. So can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes, it's the central aspect of the technique Alexander invented. Well, it is, at least for me. And the concerted use of the mechanisms is a daunting task when you start, when you think, wow, but it's not possible to organize the mechanism of the legs and the different parts of the mechanism, the torso and the neck and the head and the arms all together. It has to be done subconsciously. It has to happen by itself, or we must find a central mechanism, maybe a certain organization of the head and neck relatively to the torso that is going to do it for us. Everywhere you go, there is this really big mental idea that we need to simplify, that things have to be easy, that students or people that are coming to us want something easy, something fast, something readily obtainable, and you just pay for it and that's it, you got it. Well, it's not my way of thinking about teaching. Teaching is not like selling a product. When you teach somebody, the person has to reach out and go out of a way and learn new things and learn new activities, new capacities, and new thinking capacities. For some people, it's like insulting to say that one student would have to learn some thinking capacity. For me, it's not insulting at all. It's exactly the opposite. I am offering some difficult tribulations, some difficult problems, and we want to find tools so that the pupil will more and more be capable of solving the problems on her own. So there is no insult in saying that you need to learn something. So that's how I see my job, and that's how I see the technique. We are not here to provide an experience. Well, drug dealers provide an experience. I am not that kind of man. I want the pupils to, well, encounter new ways at thinking at things that will provide solution. And thinking is foremost. So it's also necessary sometimes to speak about the effects of the technique. And I've taken an example from Alexander's books about the effects that we are looking for, and the learning and construction of composure is very interesting because it has everything to do with the concerted use of the mechanisms as I will try to demonstrate. Here we go. Alexander is making an introduction to his last book. So it's the Universal Constantly Living, 1942. I'm using the third edition. And this introduction is fascinating. And so Alexander explains something that happens, or maybe invented, I don't know. And we are going to look at how he first describe what he saw, and second, what he took out of it. I was with a number of people one evening listening to a broadcast on an important matter given by a well-known man who is recognized as an authority on this subject. In the course of a few minutes, one of the listeners exclaimed, "Oh, that man irritates me." And it soon became evident that these words conveyed only a mild impression of the nature of his actual reaction. Later on, I had the opportunity to discuss the broadcast with him when he told me that it was the voice and articulation of the speaker that so irritated him. And this, in spite of his deep interest in the subject of the broadcast. Here then was a man whom I knew to be more than ordinary intelligence, finding it impossible to listen with composure to talk on matter of vital importance to himself and others, because of the feeling of irritation aroused in him by certain vocal and other peculiarity in the speaker. I can't help but thinking of myself talking to you with my broken English, but this is what Alexander is describing, and it's very interesting to think about this this concept of composure. Composure means originally a result of an organization or reason organization of different components of one's fields of attention. On one side, there is the words of the speaker, there is their meaning, there is the particular relations that the speaker is making with these words, and which construct an interesting viewpoint for the listeners. But on the other side, there is also, in the field of attention of the listener, there is also, well, the stimulus of maybe looking at that man or just listening to the voice of that man. And that experience, it's a global experience. Well, there is the explicit experience and the feeling experience are to be organized. This is the idea between composure. Composure is the same root as composition. You can think of decomposition and recomposition. So, of course, you're receiving multiple stimuli, and composure is the capacity to organize the stimuli with the hierarchy, with an organization that makes your goal sustainable. So that, for example, if the goal is to learn about the ideas of the speaker, well, his way of speaking and his manner is just one aspect of the whole experience. Why would this simple or single part of the experience take the first stage? It's what we call in the Alexander technique concentration. The listeners, Alexander's friend, could not help but concentrate on his feelings that were elicited by the stimulus of the voice of the speaker. And concentration has nothing to do with concerted use, of course, because when you concentrate, you cannot organize different things at the same time, which require the capacity, of course, to think of more than one thing at a time. And it's the same thing you will see with the coordination of the use of the different mechanisms of the self. And so that is the experience that Alexander witnessed. And what is now clear is that it's a complex experience, of course, but let's see what Alexander says about it. Let's see how he interprets this event. The point of special interest to me in this incident was that my friend's manner of use of himself was so bad that it could well account for the way he reacted to the speaker, and hence I was not surprised by the manner of his reaction. It was just another reminder that probably the greatest problem that is still unsolved in the education and development of mankind is the problem of the control of human reaction, because of the close interdependence between the nature of this control and the nature of the associated manner of use and functioning of the self. So from this, undesirable reaction of the listener that could not, in fact, listen to the speech because he was reacting to one aspect of the communication and one only, and capable of keeping track of the ideas. Alexander, in fact, takes us by surprise, and he says that the speaker should not try and pay more attention. He should not try to concentrate on something else, because I said he was concentrating on the feeling he experienced as a result of the stimulus of the voice. But Alexander is not saying he should concentrate. No, Alexander is saying that there is a problem in education in general. And in general, because it's a problem of the development of mankind. That is meaning that we could develop some more. And the direction of that development is clearly the capacity to think of more than one thing at a time. And so Alexander is just saying that there is a close interdependence between the nature of the control of the human reaction and the associated manner of use and functioning of the self. We have not been trained to direct the associated manner of use of the self. And for him, this is the proposed solution in order to become more capable of organizing our experiences, organizing our composure when we are faced with, stimulating events. And so it's very interesting to keep in mind that teaching or learning to organize different movements at the same time is not just a way to sit upright or to stand. It has many, many other implications in our lives, in our capacity of receiving experience and organizing our experiences in such a way that, for example, we can start with a subject and continue discussing this subject with all the experiences we get. We make some movements and something is distracting us, but we can keep our idea organized so that we can continue according to the goal that we have prepared for this session, for example. So, to develop the control of human reaction, Alexander is not asking people to keep calm or to meditate or to try and, get an hold of yourself. Like he said, I would like to, but I can't. No, he's just opening a brand new idea, brand new problem. I'm not going to have you practice any sort of direction of your mental capacity to resist your feelings or you resist your reaction to some stimuli. No, it's not the point. I'm going to have you organize very clear orders of movements, one after the other, all together. And if you do so, if you start organizing these movements, well, you will make very, very strong experiments, very, very strong experiences where you're going to feel, things that you have never felt before. And if you're able to keep your composure in these conditions, well, you can imagine that in simple, experiences like a simple event like the one Alexander is describing, you're going to be able to react in a completely new way, organizing your activity with intelligence instead of reacting to your impression. So, we have abundant proof that man's efforts in the direction here indicated, that is the control of human reaction, or in any other, have not resulted in a practical knowledge of what is needed even to prevent him from developing harmful habits in his use of the mechanisms when responding to stimuli. In other words, in his control of reaction, let alone what is needed in his attempts to change or eradicate such habits. Man remains in consequence the slave of habit in thought and action. He is incapable of making that fundamental change in his reaction by means of which he can escape from his present habit bondage, because in his attempt, he may make to change and control his reaction, he is still dominated by impulse, the associate of subconscious direction and guidance. This is a manifesto against somatic practices. That's how I look at it. Every system development that I've seen is based on feelings, is based on having somebody make you feel something, creating a special environment where you feel something that you're going to associate with well, a concept, a word like freedom or calm or peace, any word like this. And it is all based on the subconscious direction and guidance of the self, guiding yourself through what you feel. You will feel whether your neck is free. You will feel whether you're dynamic, whether you're calm, whether you're... Everything is based on feeling. And it's not what is needed to prevent the development of harmful habits. It is the base of the development of harmful habits. Subconscious direction of the different parts of the mechanisms is, well, for Alexander, the cause of this lack of composure, this lack of organization and coordination between the thinking and the body, between the thinking and the movements. People do not think about movements when they are feeling their way into a movement. It's just impossible. And there is a need of a new direction. And this new direction must be an explicit verbal direction. The fundamental change in the reaction can only come indirectly by learning to direct movements. That's what Alexander is proposing, or that's how I understand what Alexander is proposing, which is better. In my work, I only ask pupils to observe movements, observe the different movements they are making with the different parts of the mechanisms, and I simply ask a question. Do you want to make these movements? And if not, is it possible for you to stop these movements or to create an intent to stop these movements? It's just a technique where we experiment with our capacity to conduct a composure technique. A composure technique where we compose the different movement that we want to see the different parts of the mechanism perform, well, in a set condition. So the defect in reaction is a question. Where is the defect in the reaction? So I took the book that came just before the last we were discussing. This is the use of, no, this is not the use of the self, sorry. This is still the universal consent in living, but it's Alexander that is taking a step back. He's looking at what is written, what is explained when he began the observation, which led him to the evolution of his technique. So the technique evolved out of observations in mirrors, out of visual observation. Alexander did not feel his pupils. He was looking first at himself, and I'm sure he was looking at other people's movements. And it's always important nowadays to remind the students and the teacher of the Alexander technique that this is the case, because the modern Alexander technique is so engulfed into the somatic world where everything has to be felt by, well, an expert touch teacher. And that the expert touch teacher can feel things that nobody can see. Well, no, Alexander started by observation. His technique is starting from observation. So when we teach his technique in the initial Alexander technique system, in the way I developed, we start from observation, very simply. So Alexander said that at first, he did not hold any hard and fast theory as to the working of the organism. Though in common with most people, I conceive the body and mind as separate parts of the same organism. But the time came when I saw that the defects in my reaction at a given point, which I and my advisors had tried to change by direct method and treatment, were not primarily due to defects in the use and associated functioning of the parts of the mechanisms seemingly most immediately concerned, in my case, the vocal organs, but were the indirect result of defects in my general use of myself, which were constantly lowering the standard of my general functioning and harmfully influencing the working of the musculature of the whole organism. What sort of reaction can you expect of a person that is constantly lowering the standard of general functioning and whose movements are harmfully influencing the working of the musculature of the whole organism? Well, the person is not going to be at his best, that's for sure. But also, we can expect a lack of composure for the other reason, because the person is just making these movements and creating this general use by following the feeling, the subconscious guidance. The person has not learned to consciously direct the different movements of the parts of the different mechanisms. Therefore, the person is not trained. The person is quite unable to analyze her own actions. Her own actions are the result of habits. How do I sit? How do I stand? I request a student, or you will see it's a teacher of the modern Alexander technique. I request the person to come and stand in front of a chair. And then I observe the distance between the chair and the knees. It's a very simple experiment to make. You come, you stand in front of a chair, just preparing yourself to, you don't know what. The teacher certainly imagined that I was going to ask him to sit down. I had to stop him to sit down, to say the truth, because the stimulus of the chair behind him and being asked to be in front of the chair was sufficient to engage a whole train of movements that resulted in the teacher falling into the chair. So once the teacher understands that he's there to wait, it's quite a strange thing. You're asked to come in front of the chair and stand there. The separate parts of the mechanism are used by the person. The person is using the toes, the ankle, the knees, the hips, and the torso all together. And this use is a reaction to the stimulus of please stand in front of the chair. I must say that the stimulus was a bit more complex, because I said to the person, could you stand in front of the chair with the back of your knees touching the front of the chair? And the stimulus was even more complex once I discovered that when the person was coming in front of the chair and placing the feet in such a way that the knee could touch the front of the chair, the person was fidgeting with the feet, was moving from one feet to the other. There was a strange thing. So I asked the person to repeat the approach to the chair a few times. And the person came back, and I discovered that it was habit, that the person was absolutely repeating the same little procedure, coming in front of the chair and swaying from side to side and forward, swaying from side to side and forward. 4 steps, 4 or 5 steps. So I asked the person if it was on purpose. And the teacher looked at me and, what is on purpose? I said, is the fidgeting, the moving 4 times the feet and the torso to the side and then forward, a habit? The person didn't know. So I said, what would be interesting in that case would be to start again, go away from the chair, come straight back, and this time you're going to deliberately inhibit these movements of the torso to the side, and you're going to inhibit the fidgeting of the feet. It took 5 minutes, because at first the pupil started to see that he was doing it, but he started too late. So he was already doing it before inhibiting. So we had to repeat the process. So the person was starting to understand that we were not discussing how he felt, but we were discussing the relationship between his thinking, his thoughts, and his actions, his real action as observed on the video. This is very important to understand that when we think about the body and the mind as separate parts of the same organism, this is what Alexander is saying here, we forget that it's also possible to anticipate and make decisions in advance. They say, when I'm coming toward the chair, I am not going to sway the body to the side and then forward, and I'm not going to, in fact, stamp my feet on the floor. I'm going to come, and I can even prepare the situation by saying, when I'm stopping with, well, 2 steps only, instead of 4 or 5. So the defect in the reaction are not physical defects. It's not a physical defect to sway from side to side or to sway the body forward of the feet. It's just certain movements, certain actions that are occurring. And we are raising the question whether it's possible to stop these movements from occurring or not. And it was found that the pupil was capable of developing more composure, developing the capacity to direct his action with his thinking. Alexander not only observed, but he tried to make relations. You will see. On recalling this experience, I continued with the aid of mirrors to observe the use of myself more carefully than ever. So I maintain that what Alexander is observing is the different actions or movements of the parts of the mechanism he was doing in response to a stimuli. And I came to realize that what I was doing with my legs, feet, and toes when standing to recite was exerting a most harmful general influence upon the use of myself throughout my organism. This convinced me that the use of these parts involved an abnormal amount of muscle tension, and I was indirectly associated with my throat trouble. And I was strengthened in this conviction when I reminded myself that my teacher had found it necessary in the past to try to improve my way of standing in order to get better results in my reciting. So the defects Alexander experienced was a loss of voice, something that was happening very close to his neck and head. But he tells us that he began to realize that the use of the parts of the neck, voice mechanism, was in fact associated with the use of, well, his leg, feet, and toes. So it's impossible to improve the voice system if he does not change his reaction to the stimulus of standing. That's what Alexander is explaining here. The stimulus of standing, at first, is met by a subconscious reaction. At first, well, you feel yourself into standing. It doesn't matter that you feel good or bad. You can even try and stand with the best feeling you could experience. It's quite interesting. And you will see this is the experience of a somatic teacher. We have a man here that came to have sessions with me. And so I request him to come and stand in front of the chair without swaying his body forward and backward, without moving and stamping his feet before standing. I just ask him, come in front of the chair, and as your feet land, just stand. This man has been trained with the modern Alexander technique for 3 years. He had many hands-on experience apart from his on top of his training, and he's well capable of directing himself in order to feel his neck free, his head forward and up, his back to lengthen and widen. He has had many feeling experience constructed for him by his somatic teachers, and he knows how to feel fine in standing, how to feel with the less undue tension that he can perceive. And so I observe what is happening. And we see that we have, well, a line, a green line that I've added, of course, to the image taken from the film. And that line represents the direction of the force of gravity. So we have the trunk, which is what we call the torso, and the limbs that are in the field of gravity. And despite my instruction to stand in front of the chair with the back of the knees touching the front of the chair, I see that the pupil is standing, and his best standing position, controlled by, of course, his somatic knowledge. He feels fine. He feels ready to work. Well, this is quite strange, knowing what Alexander wrote, of course, because we have this text, which is taken from Man's Supreme Inheritance, the first book, and from what I have now said, it will be quite evident that the primary principle involved in attaining a correct standing position is the placing of the feet in that position, which will ensure their greatest effect as base, pivot, and fulcrum, and thereby throw the limbs and trunk into that pose in which they may be correctly influenced and aided by the force of gravity. So I see the teacher of the Alexander technique, and then I see the other teacher of the original teacher of the Alexander technique is on the right, and the modern Alexander technique teacher is on the left. And what we see is not just, well, an aspect of his standing. It's very strange that this aspect of this standing is considered as plainly wrong, a defect by Alexander. Is B, the image that is labeled B here, is incorrect. It is incorrect to, in fact, use the lower part of the torso above the toes, and it is incorrect not only because there is an undue activity in all the muscles of the legs, but it's mostly due to the fact that, well, when the lower part of the torso is that far forward, it's impossible but not to respond by having the upper torso thrown backward, with the shoulders thrown back, the head thrown back, and the neck thrown back. So there is the shortening of the back that can be easily explained by the fact that, well, the subconscious use of the self, the subconscious use of the different movements of the toes, foot, ankle, knees, and hips is creating a condition in which you cannot but shorten the back and, in fact, affect the functioning, affect the digestion, affect the breathing, affect the circulation, all that. It's obvious when you look at the founder of this technique of conscious control and conscious guidance and control, that, well, the trunk and limbs are more or less affected and aided by the force of gravity. Simply geometrically, I can say this without flinching, because you can see that the trunk and limbs are parallel to the same direction, and this is the vertical direction in standing. So there is a massive difference between the somatic teaching and the conscious control and guidance teaching. If you are told to find release, well, you're certainly going to look for release. But what you do not know is that if you control your release by what you feel, you will end up, in fact, well, in an incapacity to really understand your actions. And this bodes very badly to your composure. Composure is constructed by the capacity to organize your mind, but to organize your mind, you need objects. And if your sole object is, in fact, directed by the instant concentration on what you feel. Do I feel my neck to be free? Do I feel my back to lengthen? Or such thing as somatic are using, you will end up being incapable of composing yourself with explicit orders. So suddenly we can compare what we see with what Alexander is writing about. He says, the weight of the body, it should be noted, rests chiefly upon the rear foot, and the hips should be allowed to go back as far as is possible without altering the balance affected by the position of the feet, and without deliberately throwing the body forward. This movement starts at the ankle and affects particularly the joint of the ankle and hips. Well, of course, the movements start at the ankle here. We can see that the hips are way, way forward of the point of support. We see that in the human structure, the point of support is not at the front of the foot. Obviously, when you look at Alexander standing, you must understand that in the way he stands with the legs and trunk vertical above the ankle, the weight cannot be on the front of the foot. It's just impossible. In this organization of the limbs and trunk, the weight is on the rear part of the foot, the back of the foot, which is the heel. And when you observe this reaction to the stimulus of living, or to the stimulus of standing, you will find that the teacher is clearly looking to have an enormous pressure on the front of the foot. That's how the person has been trained to hold the foot, the floor with his feet. So from there, it's just, well, I just realized what's happening, and I'm just requesting the person to start playing with the stimulation. in order to be able, if you look at the two images, you will see that the teacher is starting to respond to orders. I'm asking him to see whether he could get, of course, his hips as far back as is possible. So this order is reasonable because we are discussing the possibility of standing with the back of the knees touching the front of the chair. Suddenly you realize that the chair has a function. The chair has a function that we can measure whether the knees are touching the chair or not. At first, the knees are very, very far away, and so the hips are as far forward as is possible, you can see. And we want to discover what is it to, in fact, direct the movement of the hips as far back as is possible. It's not explained in the book. In the book, you just have that sentence, the hips should be allowed to go back as far as is possible without altering the balance affected by the position of the feet. And you will see, without deliberately throwing the body forward. Yes, because Alexander is like a seer, because he suddenly we discover that when the pupil tries in standing to direct the movement of the hips as far back as is possible, then suddenly we need to have the hands forward. We need, because the pupil cannot but react to that stimulus of standing with the knees touching the front of the chair, cannot react to the stimulus without throwing the body. Alexander used the term body for the word torso. So we see that the teacher is throwing the middle torso forward. I requested the teacher to touch the wall with the hands. I had prepared the situation so that the chair, as you can see, could be very, very close to the wall, because I wanted to have the wall within reach of the hands. I wanted the teacher to take assurance, composure, by touching the wall. And I said clearly, as long as your hands are touching the wall, you're not falling. Why would I say such thing? Well, it's because I know something, is that the reason why the pupil is throwing his body forward is somatic. Because the teacher didn't say anything at first, but I knew that he had to throw the middle torso forward because he felt something. He felt that there was less pressure on the front of the foot, and immediately in his mind, this triggered an alarm bell. I am out of balance. And it's just, I'm continually asking the person to try and direct the hips as far back as is possible to touch the chair. Still with this idea of continuing the experiment, but then, yes, the teacher started to be a bit more explicit, and he said, I cannot, I am falling backwards right now. My toes are not touching the floor anymore. And so we see that maybe this is the end of the experiment. This is, we now maybe know what is, directing the movement of the hips as far back as is possible. At least for the moment, it's as far back as is possible with this, or maybe not. Maybe it's just a feeling. Well, most people tend to think that what is real is what they feel. And I wanted to show this teacher that there was something quite unreal in what he felt. Because at the moment he said, I am falling backward, well, you haven't got the full picture. I've got the middle torso of the person and the head and the rest, so you cannot see, but you can still imagine that the green line is not set on the ankle. The green line is set on the front of the ankle, what we call the instep. So the fulcrum, that is the center of rotation of that, very long lever of that pendulum, the fulcrum is further back than the center of gravity. So that person is saying, I'm falling backwards. what you see here is a person which weight is forward of the fulcrum, which means that if there was no wall, the person should fall forward. Yet the person is feeling that there is a fall backwards. So the reaction to the stimulus for standing with, well, the back of the knees touching the chair is for the moment, well, a strange combination of movements. There is a concerted use of the mechanism of the legs, because of course, to touch the knees, you have to move, of course, the knee, you have to move the hips, which means that the ankle is involved and the knee is involved and the hip is also involved. So the whole mechanism of the leg has to be directed. But you see also a reaction involving the mechanism of the torso parts. Yeah, the middle torso is directed, and you cannot see here, but you must imagine that the upper torso is also involved. So these movements of the different parts of the mechanisms are not consciously directed by this teacher. He's just reacting to an uncomfortable situation. He's not directing the movements of the different parts. He's not been trained to do so. And this is all we see. And it's going to be necessary to start asking the person to take an idea. So you see, I just did not accept the idea that this was as far back as is possible. And I continued to ask the person to see whether it was possible to move, and see as the hips are moving further back. Now he's pushing the chair a little bit. Yes. So his feeling of falling, his feeling of lifting the toes off the floor, well, the feeling that happened just a minute before is now not true anymore. So you can have a feeling that is true at one moment that is not at the next. So it's very difficult to guide yourself with feeling, apparently. So this person is discovering that, in fact, his feeling were telling a lie, had been telling a lie for a long time. And that despite this idea that his sensory appreciation had been re-educated during his training course. Well, concerning the stimulus of standing, certainly not. So maybe maybe lying down on a table, he had been re-educated to feel what should be felt. But in standing and the ordinary acts of life, which involves, well, a position of the torso. Alexander talks about the position of the torso in standing, in walking, in going upstairs. Well, his sensory appreciation has not been re-educated to, well, explain to the whole stimuli of living, apparently. So I am starting to have him realize that there are movements that are done in response, that he may not be completely aware of these movements or intending these movements, but these movements happens no matter what. And you can see a red line that is starting to indicate the orientation of the lower torso. It's possible for the student to use a ruler, just a little rectilinear piece of wood, and set it on the middle of the lumbar region and the back of the sacrum. And the person will see that as a result of having the hips going back, his lower torso is also going forward with the middle torso. And so the next question is, could it be possible for you to anticipate and redirect the movement of the lower torso when the hips are as far back as is possible? Because for the moment, the hips are starting to go very far back, but it's difficult to say that the trunk and limbs are affected by the force of gravity, because we can see that the trunk is clearly inclined forward at the top. And it's also inclined backward at the lower part. So we started to imagine that it could be possible to direct the movements. So we installed some mental landmarks. We said where there is a lower sacrum, there is a superior part of the knee, and there is the hips. And we would like to see whether it's possible for you to, in fact, reproduce what you've done before, that is going as far back as is possible. So then now we wanted these movements to be directed consciously, that is directed with explicit orders. So I said we want to direct or to pull the hip and the superior part of the knee backwards away from the wall in such a way as to touch the knee, the back of the knee with the front of the chair. But as you are performing these movements, we start to imagine that it could be possible to organize the direction of another movement, which is the lower sacrum movement. Could it be possible to, in fact, oppose a movement to the requested ones? Because we've seen that the requested movements, in fact, created something we don't want to see. There is an unwanted movement subconsciously produced as a result of the new movements that the person is doing in order to stand in front of the chair. And so the person will start to experiment with that, with very clear ideas that when the movements of the superior part of the knee and hips are going back, there is a tendency for the line of the lower spine to be inclined backward at the lower part and forward at the top, so that we can imagine a combination of new movements that would tend to readjust the lower spine. Yes, we can see that it's these two movements applied on the lower line of the spine could tend to, well, prepare a better support for the torso. And as the student is starting, you will find, maybe, I hope, that there has been a change. The protruding abdomen is not that far forward now as it was before, when the movement of the superior part of the knee and the hips is happening. We are not controlling the position directly. We are controlling the use, which is the mental direction of the movements of the parts of the different parts of the mechanism. We have the different parts of the leg mechanism, and we have the different parts of the torso mechanism. So this is requesting composure. This is the base of composure. The pupil has to think of these different things all at the same time, at the moment when he's feeling most, at the moment when his feeling is stronger. So he's starting to learn to combine ideas when he's feeling a lot. He's starting to develop his composure. Because we cannot develop composure when the person is lying down with a calm attitude of mind. No. The person has to be under pressure of the stimulus of living. So the stimulus of standing is a very strong stimulus because it affects the habitual sense of equilibrium. The first definition of sensory appreciation is the habitual sense of equilibrium. What is lying here? What is lying is the habitual sense of equilibrium. Remember that the pupil just before was saying, I'm falling backward. And now we can see that as a result of his direction, now he's not even touching the wall. Now he's starting to, he's not pushing the chair either. So he's just starting to experiment with a new organization of the parts where the limbs and torso are closer. They are in no way correctly, in fact, organized to be aided and influenced by the force of gravity. But when I compare with the original image, well, we can see that the pupil has gained some sort of mastery about his feelings. Instead of having his feeling, in fact, directing everything he does, he's starting to direct himself with conscious orders. So when we continue this, we start to see something. We start to see that when he's having, of course, this opposition of movement between the hips and the lower sacrum, it's getting there, because when you oppose the hips movement and the lower sacrum, you can see that this affects immediately the torso. Then I make him note that there is a tendency for him to lift the sacrum, the lower sacrum in space? Well, on that, I had to explain because he did not realize he was lifting the lower sacrum in space. Well, it's just a question of pure geometry. You have a center of rotation at the ankle. You have a very long segment. If you move this segment very far forward, you understand that you're describing a trajectory that is an arc, and that arc is directed forward and down. If you start, of course, to pull the hips as far back as is possible, it's not yet there, but you're in the direction of it. If you pull the hips as far back as in the direction of where it's as far back as is possible, then you're raising the lower sacrum. And I said to him, you're raising the lower sacrum, and he started to accept that. But I can see that you're not raising as the front of the pelvis as quickly as it could. You're pulling down. The muscles at the front of the thigh are pulling the front of the pelvis, which is part of the same bone as the sacrum. It's pulling it down. Could it be possible for you to combine the movement that will allow you to push the chair with, of course, this movement of the lower sacrum forward and upward, and the movement of the iliac at the front faster upward? And so it's a new experiment. It's a new confrontation with the actions the person is doing in response to the stimuli of standing. And suddenly the person discovers that, well, yes, there may be a possibility. And we come back to what we've discovered last week when we had our conversation, where if there is release of the extensors muscle that we have discussed, this is the piriformis group. There is the piriformis, the two gemellus. There are a whole group of muscle, which task is to organize the lower sacrum toward the hip. And when these muscles are released, we can see that instead of having the lower sacrum very close to the hip joint, we get the lower sacrum going away, and of course allowing the pelvis to rotate on the leg like this. But now we are starting to imagine that it could be possible to get a better action of the psoas group, a support of the torso, the elastic support of the torso, by in fact having, of course, the hips going as far back as is possible and directing the lower sacrum forward in order to get the front part of the pelvis directed upward, which was not happening very obviously here. So we are looking at a combination of movement which would get a correct base for the torso. That is, the legs should be exactly beneath it, vertical leg, vertical torso on top of it. We are starting to realize that this is what the gentleman in black must have been doing. This is what is starting to show, but still here, I can see that there is this tendency for the lower sacrum to be too far back and for the iliac crest to be too far down. So this is an old photograph when he was very young. This is him when he's 78, so he's much older, and I suspect, from what I see of the upper torso and middle torso, that he's solved that problem. And that's exactly what we are looking at. We start to imagine the mechanisms, and we start to see that there is a relationship, of course, between the ankle, the toes, and how the person is responding to the stimulus of living with the mechanism of the torso. And so we arrive at the end of the lesson where the pupil makes a discovery. What is the discovery? The discovery is quite simple. Is that at the end of the lesson, of course, the pupil is not able to get the hips as far back as is possible. But when I compare with the start of the lesson, he has gone in the right direction. And the right direction is not just to get the hips as far back as is possible. You must understand. The new organization is a concerted activity of movement when feeling out of balance. That is, we can see on the, or if you want, I can see on this image that the pupil is not responding somatically, is really organizing the movement of the superior part of the knee, of course, the hips, of the iliac and the lower sacrum all together to provide a new support for his torso. Alexander makes the prediction or the theory that when he's able to organize his mind under stress, under duress, because there is no better stimulus than the stimulus of that you can apply to your sense of equilibrium. Your habitual sense of equilibrium is a very strong object that you can stimulate. And as soon as you stimulate it, to see that he's now able to stand with the hips as far back as this relative to his habitual position 20 minutes earlier, and with the lower sacrum clearly directed forward, well, we can see that the person has learned something about composure during this lesson. As I hope to show fully in what follows, any attempt on man's part to bring about changes in his own reaction or that of others must begin by throwing overboard the conceptions and beliefs that are associated with the feeling upon which he has previously relied for guidance and control in the use of himself in carrying out all his activities. He will need to substitute for these new conceptions leading to belief in new procedures if he is ever to understand what is necessary to the making of fundamental change in reaction. Well, no, this is Alexander speaking, of course. We are discussing a teacher that has been made to believe that there were good feelings. There were the feelings that could be provided by somatic teachers' hands, and these would be right. And if he was capable of reproducing these feelings experience, then he would be right. And then I'm just asking him to throw them overboard. And it's just not just the theory, just the experience and demonstration that he's undergone is the proof that he needs to substitute for these ideas of correct feelings, of re-educated feelings, of well, I know what I'm doing with myself. Of course, I know I've undergone the training. Is absolutely false, and so he needs to understand and believe in new procedures of conscious guidance, of thinking and action together. Not thinking as a sort of intellectual activity or action as some sort of stupid gymnastics or stupid movements. No, no, no. It's we are all interested in the link between thinking orders, reason orders in series, and the actions that have to be coordinated together and that are filmed on video, making sure that the intentions that have been previously explained are met in practice. And to finish, this will call for a change in guidance and control in carrying out the new procedures. Of course, the change of guidance and control is the change from the somatic toward the conscious, toward the deliberate, explicit direction of the mind. Procedures that have been reasoned out as best for his purpose, but as these leads to change in the use of the organism, which are associated with unfamiliar motor and sensory experiences, sometimes discontentedly so. Much more is needed than a belief arising from intellectual considerations alone, if he is to hold to his belief during the employment of these procedures. Yes, yes, there is one thing is to have a nice constructions of ideas, nice concepts, nice theory. Well, it's necessary to test the theory with fire, the fire of the habitual sense of equilibrium. So in every procedures, there's going to be this essential element of poise, that is poise in activity against the habitual feeling of equilibrium. And we will continue with that next week. Any question, Kevin?
Just a comment. You said a really nice phrase earlier. You said most people think that what they feel is what is real, and for me, this is and it's not. I mean, the video shows that what you feel is not what is real. So, by going through the work and working with the video, obviously with the teacher first, but with the video, you begin to realize there's another realm for finding out what is real and what is not. That it's not just your feeling, and if you're assuming something is real and it isn't, how are you going to change it? So no amount of feeling more deeply if it's wrong, of being more and more aware of the wrong of an inaccurate feeling is going to help you. So and a lot of people don't want to hear that their feelings are telling them lies, because people take that offensively, but it's true.
Yeah, that's why we need experiments. It's just not simply these tools we're having together. It's of course the lessons we're having together, and the experiments you're making on your own with your video is helping you create that new belief. Well, it's strange that Alexander is talking about belief, about conscious guidance, but at first I can understand why he would use the term belief. When you have little experience or little experiments, and I think that Alexander had a lot of experiments and a lot of experience for himself, but his pupil did not. I don't think that the first generation teachers, for example, ever saw the technique as I do. That's it can explain easily why very many Alexander teachers think I'm not teaching the Alexander technique. It's because their view is so profoundly different from the one I found in the books, that yes, we are not teaching the same technique. As to who is teaching the true one, nowadays doesn't matter, because Alexander is not here to to give his support to one or the other side. It's just now that we just have to construct our activity according to ideas, and we have to debate ideas, and we have to, in fact, interrogate our beliefs, I think.
Yeah, and this is what it means to be psychophysical unity. Okay, thank you for people watching the video. If you want to book a lesson with Jeando, if you go underneath, there's a link to and his email address, so you can book a lesson, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks, Jeando.
Thank you.